As the dark footwear of the SS stepped forward, the continent shuddered. It was not merely the noise of discipline, but the resonance of a radical set of beliefs carving its path through flame and gore. At the center of that savage apparatus, the Waffen-SS emerged, a militarized, fierce battalion devoted not to the government, but to the leader. They were no ordinary infantrymen. They were individuals brainwashed, chosen, toughened, and dispatched to the front lines with the objective of victory and annihilation. But who were they truly? What sort of person joined a group that pledged loyalty until the end? Today we expose the source, growth, and grimmest aspects of this entity. Because to comprehend the Waffen-SS, it is insufficient to review its conflicts. One must peer into its personnel and face what they actually found there. From the detention centers to the academies, the personnel of the SS. One of the most frequent and logical inquiries that surface when probing the grim reality of the SS is what manner of individual, male or female, chose to enter this group. The reality is that among the 1 million men who formed the Waffen-SS and the millions of participants in other sectors of the Allgemeine SS, including specifically malicious entities such as the Sicherheitsdienst or SD, the Gestapo, and the Totenkopfverbände, there existed a remarkably diverse human range from middle and high-class academics to uneducated torturers, from dedicated visionaries to heartless profit-seekers, from wealthy growers and factory owners to the impoverished and jobless, spanning every conceivable gradation in between. Moreover, it is vital to separate the initial German volunteers from the Reich, known as Reichdeutsche, the subsequent Volksdeutsche recruits of German heritage, but born outside the borders, the Western European participants who entered the SS, and the varied collection of non-Aryan units, which in the concluding stages of the conflict included Slavs, Muslims, Asians, and others, many of whom were drafted by force or simply pressured, rather than being true volunteers. If we concentrate initially on the Reichdeutsche, meaning German inhabitants residing within the Reich's frontiers prior to the seizures of Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the Sudetenland, it is crucial to indicate a point that is frequently missed. Not all SS participants were dedicated National Socialists, just as not every National Socialist was a participant in the SS. To comprehend this, it is required to pause and examine what Nazism truly signified to the German public of the 1920s and 1930s, and how it was or was not associated with the concept of fascism. These terms, after the conflict, gained very distinct definitions, heavy with cynical associations that obscured their starting points. In the present day, the term Nazi is utilized in a basic manner to categorize any far-right organization or person. However, it should not be forgotten that the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the original core that would eventually become the NSDAP, surfaced as a labor movement whose internal roots resided in the misery triggered by widespread joblessness, hyperinflation, the loss of trust in traditional political figures, the dismissal of communism, and resentment over the requirements dictated by the Treaty of Versailles. National Socialism, though profoundly blameworthy today from any moral viewpoint, must be comprehended within its era. The Germans of that period did not possess the benefit of hindsight or the complete perspective of the horrors that would follow. Its primary tenet was savagely basic. Ancestry was viewed as the ruling element of advancement. The Germanic ancestry was allegedly better than all others, particularly Jews, Slavs, and Romas, and therefore Germany was meant to rule the continent. This set of beliefs, as radical as it was, discovered productive soil in a state enduring a national shame after its painful loss in the First World War, and which credited its collapse not to its own troops, but to Bolshevik provocateurs, Jewish exploiters, and failed commanders. The primary significant political agenda of the Nazi faction was the so-called 25-point program, initiated in 1920, which merged patriotic and labor-oriented themes. It suggested the right to employment for everyone, the state takeover of major industries, sweeping agricultural change, the creation of a powerful unified administration, the restriction of legal status to persons of untainted Aryan lineage, controls on the media, and the rebuilding of German combat power. On the contrary, Italian fascism, with which Nazism is frequently paired, surfaced as a separate faction. Although both possessed a deep-seated contempt for communism, fascism, guided by Benito Mussolini, appeared in Italy with a clear syndicalist inclination. It supported workers seizing authority over workplaces. Later, its strategy shifted toward radical patriotism, calling for honor for Italy in global affairs and the implementation of a powerful dictatorial administration. Although the Hitler and Mussolini administrations created partnerships in the 1930s, the labels Nazi and fascist are not perfectly interchangeable, nor should they be viewed as such if one aims to comprehend history precisely. Regrettably, despite all outcomes, neo-Nazi and neo-fascist feelings still endure today, not just in Germany, but across much of the continent, including the United Kingdom. However, the targeted marginalized groups have shifted. Malice, which once concentrated on Jews, now focuses on Pakistanis, Irish, and other populations incorrectly viewed as the source of current financial and communal struggles. The statement, "Let them return to their own land," so notorious in the era before the war, continues to echo in the avenues of the continent. However, there is one major distinction from the 1930s. Today, despite the financial downturn and joblessness, the public is not sprinting to enter factions like the League of St. George or comparable organizations. The memory of the horrors enacted under the Third Reich serves as a potent inhibition. Coming back to Germany between the wars, one of the primary recruitment hubs for the SS was the veterans of the Freikorps, militia groups created after the Great War, consisting of jobless and displaced soldiers who longed for a reason and a commander who would rebuild their diminished pride. These individuals shared the obsession with Hitler with millions of other Germans, but stood apart in their internal belief that they were inherently better and their eagerness to be part of an entity that acknowledged this alleged superiority. Most of the early SS members originated from the lower middle social tiers, such as craftsmen or modest retailers. However, the organization's draw rapidly reached the middle and higher layers of the community. In this area, the fascination was not so much rooted in Nazi biological theories, but on the assurance of rebuilding the order, control, and communal honor that the Weimar Republic appeared incapable of providing. To these isolated individuals, toughened by combat and accustomed to brutality, it appeared that only through raw power could they reach their objectives. In this regard, they were not different from the thousands of impoverished laborers who entered the Sturmabteilung SA, or brown shirts. Although on average, the SS candidates were more clever and shared a stern middle-class set of values, looking down on both communism and middle-class rot. The advancing columns of the SA and SS held a magnetic power over wide sectors of German life. Many felt uncontrollably pulled to enter this movement of visible power, togetherness, and prestige. But not everyone who joined was driven by principles. For many of the 3 million jobless Germans in 1930. Entering the SA signified simply the chance to obtain a set of boots and some nourishment. The SS strove to keep a more selective image. It demanded that members pay for their own clothes. Even so, it did not fully stop the entry of self-serving and lawless individuals. As the SS expanded, the character of its participants shifted. At first it rose, but over time it faded. In its beginning phase, the NSDAP lacked capital, so drawing in wealthy individuals was vital. To this end, the SS sought out the traditional leadership classes, former commanders of the Kaiser's army, and factory owners and major entrepreneurs. The latter were convinced to provide large gifts in return for getting honorary positions in the SS and the privilege of donning the dark clothes of the Allgemeine SS, though their involvement was in many instances strictly symbolic. Regarding members of the high society and military groups, their inclusion was more difficult. No honorable person of rank would enter an entity seen as a troop of rioters. Therefore, between 1933 and 1935, after Hitler took authority, the SS cleaned out nearly 60,000 participants, fixing its reputation and connecting with famous figures of the ancient German high society. Surprisingly, some agreed, including the Grand Duke of Mecklenburg and the princes of Waldeck and Hesse. By 1938, about 12% of high-ranking SS commanders originated from high-class or military lineages. Under this fresh command, the SS started to draw more and more young college learners, mostly results of the national youth groups whose main drive was authority. These individuals, mainly attorneys and finance experts, tended to enter the Sicherheitsdienst SD or the SS Hauptamt, later to become the Wirtschafts- und Verwaltungshauptamt WVHA. Although some also volunteered for the nascent SS Verfügungstruppe SSVT, later identified as the Waffen-SS. Nonetheless, an even higher ratio of SSVT commanders originated from the middle class and were pulled from the Reichswehr, the tiny permanent force that Germany was permitted to keep under the rules of the Treaty of Versailles. Another sector Himmler specifically cheered to enter the SS were the offspring of growers, mirroring his praise of the country life. In fact, unlike the ground forces and the SA, whose members originated primarily from city districts, the SS always kept a certain country dweller tone. Following the cleaning of 1933 to 1935, which aimed to remove lawbreakers, gay individuals, alcoholics, the permanently jobless, and those unable to verify Aryan lineage, joining rules were made stricter. Biological untaintedness, athletic health, certain height, and a spotless criminal history became vital terms. For a period, even a single tooth repair could be a reason for denial of entry to the Leibstandarte. These limits cut the quantity of valid candidates. Furthermore, many individuals who would have been perfect choices were turned away by Himmler's anti-church stances. Although he tried to change the SS into a secular entity, he was never fully victorious. The doctrine included heavy anti-church news, and those who held on to their religious views were targeted for internal mistreatment. However, even under this stress, 2/3 of Allgemeine SS participants kept their belief, and only in the Waffen-SS and the Totenkopfverbände did the ratio of followers drop below 50% to 31% in the situation of the Totenkopf. Confronted with the requirement to keep growing his domain, Himmler ended up gradually easing his rules, not just in church-related or athletic terms, but also in vital biological standards. An extra element in this weakening was the military's constant doubt of the SS. The building of military groups within the SS was viewed as a double-crossing of Hitler's pact with the commanders, who were the only ones permitted to carry government tools. It is doubtful that Hitler or Himmler would have predicted in 1934 that the Waffen-SS would expand to about 900,000 individuals. Some experts have hinted that Hitler behaved with hidden motives, cheering the expansion of the Waffen-SS as a balance to a possible military uprising. However, in the start, Hitler made great attempts to calm the military. In fact, the military gained actual power over SSVT entry. Only about 1/3 of the applicants taken by the SS were finally let in. The rest were taken into the Wehrmacht. Furthermore, while in times of peace the SSVT was under Himmler's control, in times of conflict it would become fully beneath the military. Hitler made this formal in a hidden paper of 1935, repeated in a command of the 17th of August, 1938. In the situation of a national crisis, the SSVT would serve beneath the military head, bound by military statutes, though politically it would stay part of the NSDAP. Taking into account that the SS started in 1923 with just 200 individuals, and by 1933 had already hit 52,000 participants, it is no shock that the military feared its rising military arm. This doubt worsened after Sepp Dietrich created the Stabswache Berlin, a 120-man group, on the 17th of March, 1933, the heart of the coming Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Before the restart of the draft on the 16th of March, 1935, the military had no power over the entry of military SS groups, though these were still too tiny to be a major danger, despite the part played by the Leibstandarte in the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. Between 1933 and 1934, tiny SS political task groups were formed in several German towns, which finally combined to build the SS Verfügungstruppe. When the draft was restarted in 1935, This battalion consisted of 5,040 individuals in the SS regiments Deutschland and Germania, 2,660 individuals in the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and 759 individuals in the leadership academies in Bad Tolz, started on the 1st of October, 1934, by Paul Leto Vorbeck and Braunschweig, set up in 1935 by Paul Hauser. These groups were the only ones formally acknowledged by the military, though there were others that were not viewed as part of the official war service. Especially important were the Totenkopfstandarten, formed from the detention camp personnel under the command of Theodor Eicke. After Rome's cleaning, Eicke was named overseer of the detention camps and commander of the Totenkopfverbände, restructuring 5 armed units, Oberbayern, Elbe, Sachsen, Ostfriesland and Brandenburg, which totaled about 3,500 individuals in March 1936. Regarding the connection between the Waffen-SS and detention camp staff, historical views have shifted. Some have tried to claim no bond, others have shown a clear link, and others have granted that due to the structural mess of the SS, there was always a swap of staff between the two areas. Before the conflict, there was a true distinction beyond the clothes between members of the Totenkopfverbände, who donned tan outfits, and those of the SSVT, who donned slate ones. The athletic rules for joining the Leibstandarte or the SSVT were harder. A lowest height of 1.80 meters, later increased to 1.84 meters, and years between 17 and 22. For the Totenkopf, the lowest height was 1.72 meters, later cut to 1.69 meters, and the top age cap was 26 years. None of these entities called for a high tier of schooling. Before 1938, 40% of SS entrants had only a basic schooling. However, it was required to verify Aryan lineage, keep a clean legal history, and be in fine athletic and cognitive health. It is worth noting that even the military was bound by biological purity rules dictated by Hitler's Aryan law, and that teaching in National Socialist beliefs was a formal piece of war schooling. As the conflict moved forward, the SS took in more and more younger and older individuals. Those most fit for war were put in field groups, while those less capable or older were dispatched to the Totenkopfverbände, thus letting go of staff from the camps for the front. In reality, there was a steady stream of staff swaps between detention camps and war groups, a point that even Paul Hauser, one of the Waffen-SS's most vital post-war advocates, did not try to hide in his books. The truth is that detention camp staff wore the same clothes, got the same income, and held the same papers as SS fighters. Even more vital is that Hitler in 1938 and again in 1939 formally stated that Totenkopfverbände individuals could be moved as help to SSVT groups in the situation of total war. The start and expansion of the Waffen-SS. The Waffen-SS had its real source on the 17th of March, 1933, when Sepp Dietrich set up a personal shield for Hitler in Berlin. In September of that identical year, this group was formally called Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. And in November, its participants promised a special oath of devotion to the leader, putting themselves outside the power of both German war and civilian statutes. At the same period, the SS political task groups started to be restructured along war lines, building the heart of the coming SS Verfügungstruppe, SSVT. The building of this elite battalion, often matched to the Roman Praetorian Guard or Napoleon's Imperial Guard, started to draw a rising quantity of entrants. Among them was Paul Hauser, a former Reichswehr commander who would act in a similar part for the Waffen-SS to that which Heinz Guderian had played for the German tank groups. A result of the traditional Prussian War Academy, Hauser had served as a lead officer on both front lines during the First World War and kept his path in the Reichswehr until his exit in 1932 at the years of 52 with the position of general lieutenant. In 1934, he was spoken to by Paul Scharfe, a legal official of the SS, and instantly took the deal of rise, going from Standartenführer of the SA to Brigadeführer of the SS, being in charge of the structure and schooling of the SSVT, a job that until then had been the duty of the military. By setting up SS officer academies in Bad Tolz and Braunschweig, Hauser reached in pulling many former Reichswehr police commanders and lower-level officers to the new SSVT. In October 1936, with the building of the SSVT office, Hauser was named its head. However, the true change in schooling styles originated from Felix Steiner, who had been an infantry lieutenant during World War I. Different from traditional military schooling based on stiff walks and show control, Steiner cheered schooling based on movement, personal duty, and collective effort. During the conflict, Steiner had led a machine gun group and seen the building of expert shock groups, which used handmade tools such as sharpened spade edges, gathered explosives, and metal grips. Moved by these methods, Steiner, raised to captain in 1927, turned away the idea of piles of disposable troops and supported elite, shifting, and quick groups. While leading the SS Standarte Deutschland, Steiner started putting his concepts into use. Schooling involved more athletics and forest running than formal walking. In fact, Steiner's members reached tiers of grit and health impossible for military troops, or even for those of the Leibstandarte, who were named pavement soldiers due to their mostly show-related part. His styles slowly reached through the SSVT, and soldiers capable of traveling 3 kilometers in full kit in 20 minutes became the standard. Although nearly half of the SS members had only basic schooling, their height and athletic state were remarkable. In 1937, Himmler claimed that only 15 out of every 100 candidates were taken. Furthermore, to be valid for a leader's rank in the SSVT, one had to have served at least 2 years in the ranks, usually in the Reichswehr. The periods of service were extensive. Leaders were bound for 25 years, lower officers for 12, and soldiers for 4. Basic schooling was identical for everyone. It started at 6 anti-meridian with a tough hour of bodywork, followed by a small meal of grains and spring water, tool schooling, close-in fighting, and belief teaching sessions 3 times a week. After midday, there were brief but tough sessions of close-order movement, deep cleaning of kit and athletics. Even to get a leave permit, members had to clear strict clothing and grooming checks. Another change of Steiner's was to tear down rank walls. Leaders, lower officers, and soldiers dealt with each other as comrades and joined together in athletic trials, which built a spirit of togetherness. Once basic schooling was finished, a final trial was held, where 1 in 3 individuals usually failed on their initial try. Only those who cleared the trial could promise the oath of devotion to Hitler, a promise spoken solely to the leader. "I promise to you Adolf Hitler as leader and head of the German Reich. Devotion and bravery. I vow submissiveness until the end to you and to the commanders you name, so assist me God." The event occurred on the 9th of November at 10 post-meridian in front of the Feldherrnhalle in Munich, in the presence of Hitler under the glow of burning sticks. However, this promise was only the initial move. The candidate then had to spend a year at an SS infantry or horse academy before taking the promise once more. This period, vowing to follow Himmler's wedding statutes, created to keep biological and athletic untaintedness. The SS phrase "Meine Ehre heißt Treu," "My honor is devotion," was a central piece, moved in part by Japanese Bushido. It carried the identical goal of absolute submissiveness and devotion until the end that the samurai taught in Japan. Several scholars have indicated the matches between the setup of the SS and that of the Society of Jesus. A strictly ranked group with tough 2-year schooling, total devotion to the commander, the pope or the leader, and internal freedom. After taking the wedding promise, the member became a total participant of the SS. Leaders of Untersturmführer position or higher got the SS blade, a mark solely for finishers of officer academies. This was not the case for those raised directly at the front line unless they later finished the class. Other marks of participation were the band with the SS stamp, initially kept for participants with membership counts below 10,000, and participation in a selective chosen group gathered by Himmler at Wewelsburg Castle, where each participant got a runic shield. Once their schooling was finished, the leaders were called to go through a deep class in actual war fighting, which included trials of bravery such as digging a hole in front of a shifting tank or enduring a bomb pop on their gear. They also joined in live fire drills with machine guns, bombs, and heavy guns. These styles caused deaths even during schooling, which pulled heat from the military. However, as scholar John Keegan noted, the grit of the schooling created a wave of SS leaders with remarkable command talents. Among them were famous names such as Fritz Witt, Kurt Panzer Meyer, Fritz Klingenberg, and Otto Kuhm. Very different from the savage camp heads such as Theodor Eicke or von dem Bach-Zelewski. However, until 1938, the expansion of the SSVT was slow due to blocks put by the military and high entry rules. Everything shifted in 1938 after the mess involving War Chief von Blomberg's wedding to a lady with a shaky history and the drop of von Fritsch due to claims made by Heydrich. Hitler grabbed the chance to take direct command of the war forces, creating the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht OKW. In March 1938, during the entry into Austria, the Leibstandarte went with the German forces. Shortly after, Gottlob Berger took command of the SS Hauptamt in charge of entry and found new pools: the Totenkopfverbände, the conflict reserves, and the regular police Orpo. In addition, Hitler cleared the building of a third SSVT regiment, der Führer made mostly of Austrians. On the 17th of August, 1938, a fresh law stated that in the situation of conflict, the Totenkopfverbände would help the SSVT. From these pieces came the initial groups of the Waffen-SS in 1940, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, later Totenkopf, and Polizei, as well as the heart of the coming Wiking. At the beginning of the conflict, the Leibstandarte counted 3,700 individuals, grouped into 4 foot soldier units, with teams of 7.5 centimeter foot soldier tools, 3.7 centimeter anti-tank tools, builders, and bike scouts. The Deutschland, Germania, and Der Führer regiments had a matching setup. There were also 5 Standarten Totenkopf: Oberbayern, Brandenburg, Thüringen, Ostmark, and Gotha, later Heimwehr Danzig. Although their merit was notably lower than that of the soldiers of the Leibstandarte and the SSVT, after the Poland push, growth went on fast. The current SS military groups were told to be restructured into 3 divisions with matching aid groups, and the count of the Leibstandarte to be raised first to that of a boosted regiment May, 1940, and then after the summer fast conflict to that of a brigade August, 1940. The 3 units of the SSVT were sent back to Germany for restructuring. Totenkopf groups were also expanded, and General Major Karl Pfeffer-Wildenbruch built a 3rd division, getting primarily Ordnungspolizei, normal police staff, many of whom were not participants of either the Nazi Party or the SS, added to by soldiers from the SSVT and the Totenkopfverbände. Following the pushes in Norway, Denmark, France, and the Low Countries, the active Gottlob Berger thought of a new path to grow the groups of Himmler's Waffen-SS. The label became formal on the 2nd of March, 1940, without breaking OKW limits on SS entry. The seized lands were filled with young individuals moved by the pace and power of German acts, still unaware of what it would signify to exist under Nazi command, and many shared belief links with National Socialism. Since 1938, Himmler had taken the entry of non-Germans into the SS, among them Americans, Swedes, and Swiss, if they were of Nordic lineage, which did not hurt his biological views. In September 1940, Himmler stated, "We must pull all the Nordic heritage in the globe to our goal to rob our foes of it and stop them from turning against one another once more." The initial non-German SS group was the Standarte Nordland, which pulled together 294 Norwegians and 216 Danes, helped by German and Volksdeutsche groups. Shortly after, in July, 1940 enough Dutch and Belgian participants, 630, to build a 2nd unit called Westland. By the conclusion of that year, the Standarte Germania of the SSVT was joined by these units, and with extra help, a fresh SS division was built. At first called Germania and later named Wiking. these Nordic participants were given more varied periods of service. They could sign up only for the time of the fight, rather than the lowest 4-year promise called for from the Germans, and the lowest height limit of 1.65 meters was removed. They got the same income, donned the identical clothes with national marks, and were bound by the same statutes. However, this growth was not enough. After Göring's loss in the Battle of Britain and the stopping of Operation Silo, Hitler started serious goals for the move into the Soviet Union. Extra entry was set up in the seized lands. Although the draw now concentrated on patriotism and the war against communism, not Nazi ideas. Despite their guts, the participants were not viewed as part of the true Waffen-SS. By September 1941, Nordwest had been broken up, and the Dutch and Belgian units were restructured into separate legions. Also, after tough state talks, several hundred Finns with National Socialist views entered the Waffen-SS. 400 of them fought with the Wiking from the initial day of the Russian push. However, let down with their handling, they were restructured into the Finnisches Freiwilligen Bataillon der Waffen-SS, which in 1942 became the 3rd unit of the Nordland Regiment. The Nord and Nordland groups were nothing like Kampfgruppe Nord, built in the spring of 1941 from 3 new Totenkopfverbände to work on the finish line. Badly schooled and low in spirit, Kampfgruppe Nord had to be pulled back and restructured as the SS Gebirgsdivision Nord, the 6th SS Division. Some groups were mostly focused on anti-rebel war, which was the spot of many horrors done by both sides. It is worth saying that many members of Prince Eugen and other Balkan groups were pushed to enter both by their states and directly by people of Berger and Heydrich. As the push in Russia went on, the vital flow of individuals led Himmler to further ease his biological rules, taking nearly anyone who was not Jewish. In the Baltic lands and Ukraine, the Germans were at first met as savers, although the acts of the Einsatzgruppen quickly broke that dream. Still, some 200,000 participants from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Muslim circles in the Balkans filled the rows of the Waffen-SS. The biggest expansion of the Waffen-SS happened between 1942 and 1944. Although the winter of 1941 to 1942 was ruinous, German soldiers reached a state to heal and move toward the Caucasus. However, the main elite groups of the Waffen-SS, such as the Leibstandarte, Das Reich and Totenkopf, did not join heavily in this move, being busy with defensive war restructurings or internal safety tasks. During 1942, only one fresh division was built, the 9th Hohenstaufen Division, primarily from 18-year-old draftees. It took 15 months to set up, getting to Poland in March 1944. The SS in war. From its first fights, the Waffen-SS carried a name for enduring unfairly high deaths on the field. Judges even within Germany itself pointed to its overpassion, extreme drive and lack of proper command as the main factors of such loss. And while such heat would be unfair after 1940, during the pushes of 1939 and 1940, there were indeed strong factors to keep it. In truth, the deeper reason lay in the very heart of the Waffen-SS. It was an elite battalion, built to hit fast and hard, to hold hopeless spots, to stand where others could not, and that had a cost. As the conflict moved on, its groups were often dispatched to the most vital front lines, used as actual moving stop brigades. The price in lives was very high, some 253,000 individuals dead or lost, nearly 1/4 of its total power. But when these counts are matched with the deaths of the normal military, more than 3.28 million individuals, more than 1/3 of its power. A mystery pops up. The Waffen-SS's drive in the long term may have protected more lives than it lost. The initial major trial occurred in Poland in 1939. Waffen-SS groups were spread among various military groups, thus missing tactical freedom. The Deutschland Regiment, joined by a newly built heavy gun regiment and a scout unit, was given to Kempf's war group and saw tough war in the struggle of Brest-Litovsk. The Germania Regiment was kept back, although it later joined the seizure of the Lemberg zone. The Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, then an elite engine-driven group, was utilized for scouting and side safety tasks in the south. Meeting particularly tough war around Pabianice and then moving toward Lodz and Warsaw, it finally joined the initial major trapping of the conflict on the Bzura River, ending in the seizure of the Modlin base, which shielded the northern path to the Polish city. Meanwhile, a Totenkopf group, the Sturmbahn Gotze, performed racial cleaning and crushing in Danzig, a dark room to the Einsatzgruppen. The result of the Poland push was final. Pleased, Hitler cleared the growth of the Waffen-SS into three fresh major groups. The SS Verfügungsdivision, with the Deutschland, Germania, and Der Führer regiments, the Totenkopf Division, and the boosted Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Brigade. The next meeting with history occurred in May, 1940 in the west, for the move into France and the Low Countries. The SS groups were smartly positioned. The Leibstandarte and the Der Führer regiment were set on the Dutch line with the task of moving fast to join with the Fallschirmjäger. The rest of the SS Verfügungsdivision moved with the 9th Panzer Division while the Totenkopf stayed back. The move started on the 10th of May. The Leibstandarte rushed into Dutch land, breaking border soldiers and moving more than 100 kilometers in a matter of hours, hitting Zwolle before midday. Although the spans had been popped, they discovered another path on the IJssel River and went on with their tough move for another 70 kilometers. In the act, Obersturmführer Krass became the initial individual in the group to be given the Iron Cross, First Class. At the identical period, the Führer regiment was tossed into a savage fight against the Gräber line near Arnhem, while the 9th Panzer Division and the SS Verfügungsdivision moved over the Maas River toward Moerdijk, where the paratroopers had seized another vital span. Following the surrender of Rotterdam, the Leibstandarte proudly entered Amsterdam and then went south toward France. Meanwhile, the Totenkopf was moved from back and given to Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. It was here that the Waffen-SS endured one of its initial major losses. At Arras, British Matilda tanks, nearly safe from standard German tools, caused ruin. Only the frantic use of 8.8-centimeter flak guns in an anti-tank part stopped the British. With the Dunkirk trap shutting, the Leibstandarte and SS Verfügungsdivision moved hard. Steiner led the crossing of the Lys River, while the Leibstandarte forced a path through the Aar Canal. But not everything was noble. During those times, individuals of the Totenkopf did their initial major war offense, killing more than 100 British captives of the 2nd Royal Norfolks. Although they tried to hide it, Major Fritz Knochlein would finally be found, judged and killed in 1948. The steady stress had a cost. Deaths were high, over 2,000 in the SS Verfügungsdivision, 1,140 in the Totenkopf, and 270 in the Leibstandarte. However, their power for action was seen, and after getting help, the SS groups were put back into the move toward southern France. In the second stage of the push, the Waffen-SS engine divisions started a fast move into the heart of France. The Leibstandarte, under the command of Sepp Dietrich, led the walk in every major fight from the Somme River. They crossed the land to hit Vichy and beyond to Saint-Étienne. Along the way, Paris was named a free city, and French shield fell apart. In matching time, the Polizei division had its start in war in the last days of combat, crossing the Aisne River and fighting in the Argonne forest. Finally, after the fall of France, Hitler in public cheered the work of the Waffen-SS in his talk before the Reichstag on the 19th of July, 1940. In honor, Sepp Dietrich, Felix Steiner and Georg Kepler got the Knight's Cross. The Western push not only fixed the war name of the Waffen-SS, it showed that when under tough command like Steiner's, they could match and even beat the finest normal military groups in fast shifts and grit. However, it also showed the cost, an unfairly high death count when commanders were average, as was the situation at Totenkopf under Eicke and Polizei under Pfeffer-Wildenbruch. With its eyes set on the coming major move, the entry into the Soviet Union, the Waffen-SS started its last growth. New divisions were built such as the coming Wiking, made partly of participants. The schooling of Waffen-SS leaders in Bad Tolz and Braunschweig was not a goal itself, but rather a lead-in to a bigger target: the use of their lessons in actual war. During the initial years of its life, the SS Verfügungstruppe (SSVT) had fixed itself as an elite battalion, a select group that called for body grit, total submissiveness, and an almost holy love for the leader. However, the move from theory to the use of current war was still to arrive. Schooling at Bad Tolz taught movement, drive, and personal duty, a major break with old-school Wehrmacht war thinking. Under the power of leaders such as Felix Steiner and Paul Hauser, members were told to shift to a steadily changing field where scattered command could signify the gap between win and death. The rule of leading from the front, where leaders took the risks with their individuals, created a grit and radical elite, but also sensible and useful. As the Reich moved in its land goals, the initial Bad Tolz finishers started to get task orders. Many of them joined the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler LSSAH, Hitler's own shield regiment, or the Deutschland, der Führer and Germania regiments, core parts of the SSVT. These groups, which at first had show or political police roles, were slowly militarized with an eye toward coming move tasks. The seizure of Austria in 1938, Anschluss, marked the initial major join of the LSSAH in a field task, though without weapon push. The Sudetenland push and the seizure of Czechoslovakia in March 1939 went on with this move act, fixing the stage for the coming European conflict. For the Waffen-SS, these acts were a chance to trial its control and power under states of true stress, though not yet meeting the pains of open war. The true trial arrived with the move into Poland in September 1939. The SS units joined into normal military groups, fought on different parts of the line. Their work, though brave, showed tactical gaps and a bent for extreme drive that, while prized in some spots, also resulted in scary high death counts. The Poland push also showed the grimmer side of the SS, its direct part in acts of savagery against civilians, quick killings, and racial cleaning. The Totenkopfverbände groups built from detention camp staff played a specifically dark part. Although there was first a formal split between the SSVT war groups and the Totenkopf, in use, the line blurred and the part of both sorts of groups in war offences started to dark the name of the whole Waffen-SS. Following the fast win in Poland, Hitler cleared the expansion of the Waffen-SS. Goals were made to build whole divisions capable of working half alone. This fueled fast growth in leader schooling academies, specifically at Bad Tolz, where entry rules stayed tough, but the need for help was starting to have a cost. The 1940 push in the West, the move into France and the Low Countries, was the next major step. SS groups joined in vital acts, such as the move toward Rotterdam and the break of the Grebbe Line in the Netherlands. In France, the LSSAH and the SS Verfügungsdivision showed clear task win. Although again hit by acts of brutality against war captives, such as the Le Paradis killing, the work of the SS groups in the West fixed their name as shock soldiers. Their grit on the field was seen, although their conduct raised worries both within the Wehrmacht High Command and abroad. Nonetheless, Hitler told of their growth and updates, clearing the building of fresh divisions and the join of foreign participants. The military win of the Waffen-SS also had a direct effect on the growth of schooling. From 1940 forward, the sessions at Bad Tolz more and more pointed to actual war schooling, forest shifts, fake moves under real fire, grit in extreme weather, and city fighting. Biological theory and belief teaching stayed central topics, but were now merged with a more tough and sensible war setup. Meanwhile, the European political state became more and more shaky. Italy's loss in entering Greece and the takeover in Yugoslavia broke Hitler's goals for the move into the Soviet Union. In March 1941, the command to hit the Balkans shifted the Reich's strategic focus. This fresh push would stand for the Waffen-SS not just a chance to verify its value in hill land and rough resistance, but also a savage lead-in to the coming struggles on the Eastern Line. The leaders schooled in Bad Tolz, many of them recent finishers, were given to the groups that would be sent into the task. Individuals were called for who merged tough savagery with tactical shift. The conflict in the Balkans would not be a standard push of major groups moving in open zones, but rather a chain of broken fights in hill land against spread but tough foes. Set up for this fresh stage involved a change of the tools and gear of the SS groups. Movement was prioritized: bikes, light off-road cars, and small foot soldier tools. The scout teams in particular would be given a top part, and many of their young leaders came straight from the rooms and schooling zones of Bad Tolz. The spirit taught at the academy, a mix of radical devotion, task freedom, and total lack of care for risk, would be put to the trial in the tough hills of Yugoslavia and Greece. There, meeting a driven foe, helped by the land and toughened by resistance, the Waffen-SS would forge both its war myth and its dark name for savagery. When in April 1941, Waffen-SS groups moved over the frontiers of Yugoslavia and Greece, they were no longer just individuals in dark taught with theories of biological power. They were toughened war participants, results of a belief and war apparatus that had reached a point to blend radical idealism with deadly power. The Balkan push would stand for the final war start for a wave of SS leaders. For many of them, it would be the start of a path that would guide them to the white zones of Russia, the flatlands of Ukraine, and finally to the break in Berlin. But it all started there, in the rooms of Bad Tolz, on forest walks, in the promises of total devotion spoken under sticks, and in the radical belief that their path was to war and die for the Reich. The true conflict had started, and the Waffen-SS, built by the flames of schooling and the making of beliefs, was ready to jump into its bloody trip through the Balkans. The hit on the Balkans. As the German war machine got ready for the massive Operation Barbarossa, luck and the errors of his friends pushed Hitler to briefly move his focus towards southern Europe. The factor was the Italian mess. Mussolini, in a wild act, and without asking Berlin, had entered Greece in October 1940. It soon became clear that the Italian soldiers were not ready for the trial. Poorly geared and low in spirit, they not only failed in their move, but started to be shoved back even before British help arrived in March 1941. The scale of authority in the Balkans hung in the balance. Bulgaria and Yugoslavia, under great stress, formally entered the Axis. But in Yugoslavia, a patriotic takeover tossed out the pro-German state, replacing it with one clearly hostile to the Third Reich. Hitler, livid, flew into a fury. In one of his famous bouts of anger, he told of the move into Russia being moved back. First, he had to break the Balkan rebels. Thus, the Waffen-SS soldiers were once again called into war. From their stop zones in France and Austria, elite groups started to move. The Reich Division was joined into General Reinhardt's 41st Panzer Corps, while the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler was given to List's 12th Army. On the 6th of April 1941, the move into Yugoslavia started. As usual, the Reich Division moved with a pace and drive that shocked everyone. While the bulk of the German forces were concentrated on breaking resistance south of the Drava and Danube rivers, a shock group led by Hauptsturmführer Fritz Klingenberg from the engine team started a nearly suicidal task. They grabbed a motorboat, crossed the Danube, and with just a few individuals entered Belgrade. Taking advantage of the total mess, they reached a point to push the city's head to give up the capital. The drop of Belgrade to such a tiny group was one of the most amazing acts of the push. Meanwhile, to the south, the Leibstandarte met a fully different trial. Their task was to open a path through the hills, splitting Yugoslavia from Greece, toughly shielded by Australian, New Zealand and Greek groups. The Klidi Pass was the initial major block. For 2 days, the Leibstandarte fought savagely to break foe resistance. The move was not simple. Allied machine guns hit the hill paths, and the sharp land gave little safety. In the center of this hellish struggle, the young and bold Kurt Panzer Meyer, leading the Leibstandarte scout unit, saw an act that would be held in memory for years. Seeing his individuals slow to hit under the loud fire, he tossed a bomb at their toes, actually forcing them to exit the holes. The move, as frantic as it was bold, finally started the hit that broke through the shields at the pass. The Leibstandarte then went on with its move, meeting Greek soldiers at the Klissura Pass. Once again, after tough body war, the Waffen-SS forces won. Confronted with the pace and savagery of the German move, the Allies had no choice but to pull back south. These acts were a total win. In just a few weeks, German soldiers wiped out all resistance in Yugoslavia and Greece, ending in the drop of Athens and the total isolation of the British groups sent to help the Greeks. For the Waffen-SS, this Balkan push was more than just a war win. It fixed their power to fight in extreme states, both in hillland and in high-pace acts. However, it also showed another truth. The human cost was always very high. The iron grit of its individuals, their radical submissiveness, and their power to hit under hopeless states were prized. But they arrived at the cost of great loss. As German colours flew across the Balkans and paratroopers fought to seize Crete, Hitler and his high command were already eyeing the east. The delay of Barbarossa had cost vital weeks. Now the biggest war push in history was about to start, and once more the Waffen-SS would be at the lead. The SS in the east, the avenues of Paris in those times of pride for the Third Reich, saw the Panzer II and Panzer IV tanks of Adolf Hitler's Leibstandarte walk past in formal shape around the Arc de Triomphe. But the time of simple wins was reaching a conclusion. In Greece, the German move was ruinous. Kurt Panzer Meyer, using his unusual styles, led his scout unit to seize thousands of captives with nearly no deaths. A risky and savage act, but clearly useful. In just a couple of days, Meyer seized more than 12,000 foe soldiers, gaining him the Knight's Cross. After seizing the Metsovo Pass, the Leibstandarte reached a point to trap 16 Greek divisions, forcing them to give up. Greece fell apart soon after, and the British groups narrowly got away thanks to a bold German air hit on the Corinth Canal. However, win arrived at a cost. The shift of tools and the delay of more than a month, triggered by the Balkan push, were ruinous for German goals in Russia. Although some later scholars minimized the effect of this delay, proof hints that the mix of a late start and the early tough Soviet winter was final in the German loss at Moscow. The true story of the Waffen-SS would be penned, however, in the east. On the wide Russian flatlands, in the infinite swamps, in the thick woods, the Waffen-SS troops would feel a conflict that would break any prior idea of war. What was first shown as an ideological march against Asian communism soon became a mean and total fight for life. At the start of Operation Barbarossa on the 22nd of June, 1941, the power of the Waffen-SS on the front lines was grand. The Leibstandarte numbered 10,796 individuals, the Reich Division 19,021, the Totenkopf 18,754, the Polizei 17,347, the Nord Division 10,573, and the Wiking Division 19,377. A powerful group, but soon under hellish stress. In the north, the Nord and Standarte No. 9 fought alongside the Finns in the cold woods, though not without shame. During a failed hit, their soldiers shook and ran in mess. Further south, the Totenkopf and Polizei moved with Military Group North toward Leningrad, while the Reich walked with Military Group Center toward Moscow, and the Leibstandarte and Wiking fought in the south with Military Group South. The war was savage. The initial German hit was ruinous, but Soviet resistance quickly toughened the line. The Reich stood out by grabbing the initial crossing of the Berezina, fighting hard at Smolensk and Yelnya, standing against huge hits with a count of 11 Russians to every German soldier. Meanwhile, the Leibstandarte and Wiking moved through Ukraine, breaking Soviet lines and entering deep into the south, hitting Rostov-on-Don. Winter, however, was the true foe. Under heavy rains first and then white snow, the German move came to a stop. The Das Reich, almost spent, was pulled back in March 1942 after losing more than 4,000 individuals in the war around Moscow. The Leibstandarte, still war-fighting in Ukraine, barely stood against Soviet counter-hits on the Dnieper before it too was pulled back to be restructured as a panzer division. Meanwhile, the Totenkopf was shut in the hell of the Demyansk trap, where it stood through a siege for months. The Wiking, which became a mark of German rage, reached a point to hit the gates of the Caucasus, although it never crossed those mythic hills. The Polizei was pulled back for safety work, and the hit Nord after its initial loss was remade as a hill division. In 1943, when all seemed gone after the mess at Stalingrad, the Waffen-SS once more showed its grit. The Leibstandarte Das Reich and Totenkopf divisions, now joined in the fresh 1st SS Panzer, started a grand counter-move at Kharkov, wiping out thousands of Soviets and breaking more than 600 tanks. But the cost was gory, 12,000 deaths. The summer of 1943 brought the Battle of Kursk, the biggest tank fight of the whole conflict. There, despite the frantic goals of the SS Panzer divisions, the German move stopped. Hitler, scared by the Allied arrival in Sicily, stopped the push and pulled back the Leibstandarte to the shield of Italy. Although within a few months, the need in Russia would push its return. From Kursk forward, everything was flipped. In the west, the Allies arrived in Normandy, and in the east, the Soviets broke through the German lines on all sides. The Wiking and Totenkopf still reached a point to delay the drop of Warsaw. But they could not stop the bloody crushing of the Polish revolt. The thinned divisions stood toughly, but the huge mass of the foe was now unstoppable. In December 1944, with the Third Reich already shaking from the Allied move on all sides, Hitler risked everything on one last frantic hit, the Ardennes push. For this vital task, he picked the finest that stayed. The elite divisions, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Das Reich and Hitlerjugend, all joined into the 6th SS Panzer Army. The goal was bold. A surprise hit on the softest part of the western line, the thick snow-filled Belgian Ardennes, aiming to break through the American lines, seized the vital port of Antwerp and split the Allied forces. The risks were huge. A win could shift the path of the war in the west. The hit started on the 16th of December, 1944, under tough weather states. Low skies and a hard winter worked in the Germans' favor. Allied planes, vital to the Allies' tactical power, were briefly out of work, unable to move in the mist and snow. Grabbing this benefit, the Waffen-SS divisions rushed forward. The Leibstandarte under Joachim Peiper moved fast with its panzers west, causing ruin on the American rows. Next to them, the Das Reich and the Hitlerjugend pushed hard, reaching major gaps in the lines of shield. During the initial few days, the German move was fast. Whole towns fell one by one. American groups were trapped, and fear grew. It appeared that for a bit, the Reich might yet flip its luck around. However, gaps soon started to show. The hill-wood land covered in snow slowed the shift of the tank cars. The thin paths became fatal jams. Gas needs, vital for the tanks, started to fail. And when the weather opened, Allied strike planes returned to the skies, breaking whole rows of German cars. The force of the push stopped. It was in this savage spot that one of the darkest times of the push occurred. The Malmedy killing. On the 17th of December, near the town of Bonnier, soldiers of the Leibstandarte, under Peiper's command, seized about 100 American troops from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. Under states still under look, the captives were bunched in a field, and instead of being led to the back, were shot in cold blood. More than 80 American troops were killed, most of them shot at close range. Some survivors reached a point to run under the snow and tell what had occurred. News of the killing spread fast through the Allied rows, toughening their grit to fight and prompting later paybacks against seized German troops. The Malmedy killing left a permanent mark on the record of the Leibstandarte and, by extension, the whole Waffen-SS, fueling the view of radical savagery that had already hung over these groups since the early years of the conflict. Finally, in late December and January, with the Allied counter-hit fully going, the dream of the Ardennes push fell apart. What had started as a frantic risk ended in another strategic mess for Germany. Although they fought toughly, the elite divisions were deeply thinned, losing thousands of individuals and much of their heavy gear. The Ardennes push, the last great try of the Third Reich, had failed. After the mess of the winter of 1944–45, with the Eastern Line falling and the Allies moving in the west, the Third Reich was fatally hit. Yet Hitler, blind to the facts, still dreamed of hopeless tasks, trusting that his elite divisions, specifically the Waffen-SS, could flip the certain path. In January 1945, as the Red Army started its final push from the Vistula, Hitler turned his focus to an already lost spot. Budapest, the Hungarian capital, trapped by the Soviets since December 1944, was frantically standing. Inside, more than 50,000 German and Hungarian troops, including the rest of the 9th SS Corps, built by the Florian Geyer and 22nd SS Volunteer Horse Divisions, were fighting in hellish states, without help, without extras, trapped under steady bombing and hungry. In his madness, Hitler told the 6th Panzer Army SS, recently pulled from the failed Ardennes hit, to walk into Hungary to break the trap, the push known as Operation Frühling Erwachen. Spring Awakening was started in March 1945. The elite divisions Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Das Reich Hitlerjugend and others hit across the dirty broken land of Transdanubia. First, the Germans made moves entering deep into the Soviet lines toward Lake Balaton. However, dirty land, tricky heat and Soviet air power stopped the push. The move was broken in less than 2 weeks. Despite the grit shown, specifically by the Leibstandarte groups, the task ended in mess. Meanwhile, inside Budapest, the state was hopeless. Unaware that the help had failed, the trapped tried a final break in February 1945. It was a killing. Of the 50,000 individuals, only 785 reached a point to get away through Soviet lines. The rest were either wiped out or seized. Upon getting news of the drop of Budapest and the failure of the Frühling Erwachen, Hitler, in a bout of rage, told the divisions of the 6th Panzer Army SS to take off the armbands they had proudly donned for years from their clothes. It was a public shame, a savage fine for those troops who had fought without stop. In April 1945, the Red Army started what would be its final move toward Berlin, the capital of the Reich. From the Oder and Neisse, more than 2.5 million Soviet troops, helped by thousands of tanks and tools, started the hit. Meeting them, the Third Reich could only gather thin pieces. Volkssturm, badly armed civilian groups, spent Wehrmacht groups, and the staying Waffen-SS. The shield of Berlin was given in part to Army Group Steiner, a fast-made bunch under the command of SS General Felix Steiner, built from the rest of the former elite divisions, the Nordland, Nederland, and Wallonian. The command was simple and suicidal counter-hit. Steiner tried to gather power, but it soon became clear that this was a hopeless task. He lacked individuals, tanks, and ammo. Still with frantic grit, his troops tried local hits against the huge Soviet power. It was no use. Zhukov and Konev's forces broke through the outer shields and moved surely toward the center of Berlin. Within the city, the last staying Waffen-SS troops, individuals of the Nordland Division, the Hitlerjugend, French participants from the Charlemagne Division, and thin pieces of many other groups, shielded spot after spot, home by home, avenue by avenue, often to the last individual. In the center of the struggle around the Reich Chancellery and the Führer bunker, they fought with frantic rage. 17-year-olds, toughened veterans, non-Germans fighting for a lost goal, all aware that there would be no way out and no mercy. The war was fought body to body with flame tools, Panzerfausts, blades. On the 30th of April, 1945, as the Red Army moved its colors over the burning Reichstag, Adolf Hitler killed himself in his bunker next to his fresh wife, Eva Braun. In the following days, resistance faded. General Helmuth Weidling, commander of Berlin, signed the total surrender on the 2nd of May. The last Waffen-SS troops, including many of the Charlemagne and Nordland participants, were either killed fighting or taken captive.